Eden Molson's head throbbed from the smell of burning oil in the lamp. If he stayed here much longer, he wondered if he might die from not tasting fresh air more than anything else. Not from torture or beatings.
Damn it.
As soon as he cursed internally, the thought of his younger siblings suddenly pierced his mind. When he looked up, there was a man sitting right in front of him, legs crossed. A strikingly handsome man, the kind even men would turn to look at. It was Kreis, a name he knew well from the Madmen platoon. He never imagined that this bastard had been assigned to monitor him and his sibling. But now, blaming the situation wouldn't change anything, so Eden asked a practical and realistic question.
My sibling.
They're perfectly fine, eating less than usual, but I think that's just the secret to maintaining their figure.
His smooth tone was insufferable.
If you'd fled right before the Civil War broke out, none of this would have happened.
Eden almost replied that he wished he could have, but stopped himself. How could he flee when he didn't know what was coming? He knew that his father, the so-called king of the border, had planned the Civil War and was now executing it. But he couldn't openly talk about that. No matter what anyone said, that man was still his father, and committing treason surely meant a joint beheading. Would he stand against his father? Not a chance. Eden knew the extent of his father's power. He wasn't a man who fought battles he couldn't win. All Eden Molson wanted was to live quietly somewhere with his sibling. The east, the north, anywhere would do. That's why he endured being beaten by that bastard Enkrid. He even convinced his father that his sibling could seduce Enkrid to help them. Looking back, though, it seemed his father had never cared about him at all.
Not that he would have let us escape, anyway.
Kill me,
Eden said, knowing that these were his father's enemies, and they wouldn't keep him alive. As an asset? Not a chance. That Father Molson, his father, had stopped being human at some point. His coldness was like that of a permanently frozen land, eternal permafrost. It wasn't obvious on the surface, but up close, he had an inhuman coldness.
When did that start?
Eden didn't know. It was beyond his comprehension. At some point, his father had changed.
What do you mean, kill you?
Kreis shook his head from side to side, slapping his thigh loudly before speaking.
Let's do this instead.
Kreis knew how to handle people. He was quick-witted and good at assessing situations. He had long since realized that Eden Molson had no value as a hostage. Count Molson cared nothing for the son in front of him, nor for the daughter he had disguised as a man and brought along. It wasn't Kreis's concern to get involved in family matters, but one thing was clear.
Eden Molson wants to run away.
His desire was obvious. There was no need for torture.
Tell me everything you know and head to Martai. We'll set you up with a new identity and a house. You probably plan to sell some jewels or trinkets to get by, but do you really think you can dispose of such items so easily? You'd be lucky not to get stabbed by a thief at night.
Kreis had hidden people and earned money through the krona before. He had even considered making a career of it at one point, but he gave it up because the chance of getting stabbed or imprisoned was too high. Still, his old knack hadn't disappeared. Through the Gilpin Guild, it was easily possible, so it wasn't a difficult task.
You're really going to let me live?
Suspicion filled Eden's eyes.
Yeah, I wouldn't believe it either.
Kreis gave a reasonable response that anyone would nod at.
I swear on the honor of the captain.
The captain was Enkrid. The weight that Enkrid's name carried in the border guard was incomparable to anything else. Even if people didn't know the name of the Lord, they all knew the name Enkrid, even the kids playing in the streets.
And if you're lying?
Do you have another option?
Eden didn't have any other choices. He could trust and talk or just die.
Sigh, damn it. I really got caught up in this.
Eden Molson shared what he knew. It wasn't important to him anyway. He didn't know much to begin with.
There are 5 weapons in the Count's territory.
Weapons, not men?
The unit sounded odd.
It's what they call 5 warriors, each wielding a different weapon.
The explanation wasn't long. The Count's forces were divided into 4 main divisions, each commanded by one of the 4 generals. The rest of the organization was similar to that of the kingdom. Then there were the 5 warriors, raised by the Count to protect him. Known as Molson's 5 weapons, these 5 were also called monsters, proving their power through sheer might. A mute warrior wielding a hammer, Malton. A giant who used his body as a weapon, Benukt. Zalvin, who mastered dual spears as if performing a trick. Bannet, fairy of the leaf blade, and Learbart, the bodyguard warrior of a fallen noble family.
Each of them could have easily joined the knightly orders. And they're all completely loyal to the Count.
Just thinking about them made Eden's mouth go dry. They were all inhuman monsters. Count Molson was persistent and cunning. That's why no one knew the full extent of the power he had hidden.
Do you think he's allied with the cultists?
Kreis had the same thought, which is why he asked, was the Count pulling in other groups besides Aspen?
No need, he's got his own forces.
Eden spoke, and Kreis's relaxed expression quickly changed. There was no need for more explanation.
He's built an absurdly powerful army.
While the border guard was holding back Aspen, while the kingdom was holding back the demon realm in the south. Count Molson had stayed quiet. Despite being called the king of the border, he hadn't caused much trouble. He had been gathering strength all this time. But was that all? Would that sly man stop there? There must be more tricks hidden. It was a certainty that started with suspicion. When Kreis suddenly sprang up, kicking the chair back, it fell over with a thud. Seeing that, Eden closed his eyes. The die had been cast, and Eden felt like he knew what the result would be. From outside, he could hear Kreis shouting with all his strength.
Auden! Commander Sinar, Battalion Commander Graham, we need to organize reinforcements immediately!
It was a mistake to knock down the sheriff like that. The speaker was some guild master who had stuck close to Enkrid. It was honestly annoying, but Enkrid let it go. The man had approached them with something resembling goodwill. He had supported them with various weapons and equipment, even accompanying them on their journey to the Nauril Plains. He also mentioned, more than once, that he had wielded a sword in his younger days. So, it was his way of expressing a willingness to fight alongside the royal army.
A mistake?
Andrew, who was walking behind, reacted as if the comment irked him. I understand you're skilled, but don't you know? Reputation is just as important. The guildmaster explained in a defensive tone, to which Andrew responded with a snicker. The guildmaster, seeing this, frowned for a moment before quickly regaining his composure. After all, Andrew was the head of the rising noble family, the Gardeners, and the 5 trainees under him were all known to be exceptionally skilled. Enkrid didn't care what the guildmaster tagging along had to say. Why was this even being brought up? It didn't take much thought to figure it out. No one who had seen what Enkrid had done had spoken about it widely. Asia, who had some knowledge of the situation, wasn't the type to gossip. Would Rem talk? Gossiping was Rem's specialty, but there wasn't anyone here for him to chatter with. And as for Ragna and Jackson, there was no need to mention them. Would Esther step up and say,
"This is the man who saved your king?"
Not likely, of course. There were those who had seen Enkrid in action. The ones he had faced when rescuing Krang. They had witnessed his swordsmanship when he cut down a squire in one stroke, but they had fled immediately after. Obviously, they hadn't had the chance to talk about it. Krang hadn't said much, nor had Matthew. Even the trident-wielding bodyguard had been silent. But if anyone started spreading nonsense, both Matthew and the trident guard would have been furious. It wasn't that no rumors had spread at all, though. There were the Squire Lawford and some of the palace maids. Thanks to them, the story had started to circulate. The rumors that Enkrid, the hero of the border guard, was the real deal. Slowly, the earlier talk about him being an exaggerator or an empty shell was fading, but not all nobles were ready to acknowledge him. So what? As mentioned before, Enkrid didn't care at all. Neither did the people who had gathered around him, unless someone came to mock them directly, and if they didn't, there was no need to bother. Enkrid's mind was preoccupied with other things. There were many things to think about, many things to do. All the way to the Nauril Plains, Enkrid had been reflecting on what had happened, starting with the moment when Ingis, a knight of the Red Cape Knights, sought him out before leaving. I am Ingis of the Red Cape Knights. I have a feeling we'll meet again. Even though Enkrid hadn't done anything in particular, Ingis's interest had clearly been directed at him. Next time, I hope we can spar. Without doing much to encourage it, Enkrid had caught Ingis's attention.
Why do you want to fight the captain?
Rem had asked curiously. It was usually Enkrid who challenged others to fight, but the reverse was rare. I've got a good sense about these things. You seem like an interesting person. Ingis had brushed his hair back and spoke seriously. In Enkrid's eyes, the man seemed like a truly unique individual. Well then, until next time. He left, saying he had many troublesome matters to attend to in the south. Before departing, he repeated once or twice that they would meet again.
You're becoming more of a man to fall for with each passing day.
After that, Luagern came to see him. After crossing blades a few times, she said,
At this point, it's beyond my abilities.
her ankle was still not fully healed. Even for a frog, it's impossible to regrow an ankle in a single day. But even so, the difference in skill was obvious.
Still, there's more I can teach.
For 5 days, Luagern helped fine-tune Enkrid's mastery of the correct sword technique. Naturally, Enkrid diligently absorbed everything.
Did I do it like this back then?
While marching, Enkrid kept moving his hand in various ways, recalling his swordsmanship. It was part of his daily routine, and everyone saw it but thought nothing of it. After all, there weren't many people to watch him since he didn't have soldiers under his command. There were only Ragna, Jackson, Dunbachel, Rem, and Andrew. Except for Andrew, the others originally belonged to the Border Guard Reserve Unit, so it was no surprise that he had no troops of his own. The journey to the Naril Plains was smooth. No ambushes, no attacks. The scouts constantly reported the enemy's movements. Throughout that time, Enkrid simply kept refining what he had honed over the past month. A month which could usually be considered a short time felt different this time.
You've improved a lot.
Ragna's gaze had changed.
Sai, come at me. I'll take you on half seriously at least.
He even managed to draw out some seriousness from Rem.
This makes no sense.
Asia, who had come to visit after recovering to some extent, shook her head. She couldn't understand how someone could improve so much in just a few days.
It's hard to recognize who you were before.
Even Jackson made such a remark. It was high praise. Enkrid merely nodded in response. For the past month, Enkrid had barely spoken. He had simply focused on swinging his sword. Was it because of the challenge posed by the ferryman? That wasn't the whole reason. Deep inside Enkrid, the memory of the junior knight who had severed his flow kept surfacing. Enkrid repeatedly asked himself, deep within his inner thoughts,
What if I had fought until the end?
what would have happened? Through these repeated questions, he found the answer. No, he already knew the answer. The experience gained through countless repetitions of that day. Now, after walking and walking, his vision had finally cleared. At most, 3 strikes, that's all it would take. He could overcome it. That's why the obstacle wasn't a wall for him. It was a fresh experience. It was only a month. Compared to the countless repetitions of that day, it seemed like such a short time, but the time had become rich in concentration and density. Enkrid showed noticeable improvement day by day. Each day was a moment when he absorbed the accumulated experience from those repetitions. To others, it seemed like nothing short of a miracle.
Well, at least you won't die easily anymore.
That was Rem's conclusion, and so they arrived at the Naril Plains. As summer arrived, green shoots sprouted and grew across the field, and beyond them the enemy appeared. The line of soldiers was enough to make anyone's head spin just by looking at them.
That's a hell of a lot.
Rem was the first to speak. Ragna nodded, and Jackson, with his arms crossed, only slightly lifted his head. Dunbachel scanned the line from the left to the right before speaking.
Looks like they've got 3 times as many as we do.
She was right. The numbers were overwhelming. The commanders in Krang's army had suspected that the Count might have involved a cult or tried some kind of trick. They were mistaken. The difference in sheer numbers was undeniable. The well-trained army of the Lord's domain numbered close to 10,000. Just seeing their ranks halted and formed was enough to crush the morale of their side. The army assembled to face the civil war was roughly 3,000. They were outnumbered, outmatched in training, and clearly facing a losing battle. Ahead of the army stood the 5 weapons of the Count. Each was flanked by 2 adjutants, who were also brimming with a formidable presence. Though the weather was bright and clear, it felt as if dark clouds were gathering. A black cloud hovering solely over their side, and then,
I'll go say hello.
one man who had been silently focused on his swordsmanship all the way here stepped forward. He wanted to test his sword. On some level, he also instinctively sought to turn the tide of the current atmosphere. It was the sense he had developed, the ability to read the mood and strategy from his battles with Aspen.
Come here, Odd-Eye.
Enkrid called out to his odd-eyed horse, which had become reliable in carrying him, and mounted. The sound of a horn echoed with a long blast. As the drums beat, a single rider moved forward.
Come at me, anyone.
He called out. While most were left in stunned silence, one of the adjutants of Zalvin, one of the 5 weapons, stepped forward.
I'll bring back your head.
The opponent wanted a duel, and that would suffice. The adjutant thrust his long spear forward and rode out on his horse. His opponent dismounted. What kind of fool dismounts in a situation like this? The adjutant's horse let out a loud cry.
Ha!
With the shout, he spurred his horse on, and the ground began to rumble beneath its weight. The warrior on horseback, wielding his spear, seemed as though he could turn any person standing on foot into minced or skewer them like a roast. Someone in the royal army pointed ahead with their mouth agape. Shouldn't they avoid that? Such was the question on everyone's mind. But most just stood and watched. It wasn't that everything had happened in the blink of an eye, but what else could they do? In this situation, all they could do was watch. Those who had eyes and could see the situation unfolding thought the man would be impaled and killed by the spear. Those who didn't know Enkrid thought so. Only a few remained calm. They knew who had stepped forward. The horse quickly closed the distance. Even from afar, the heavy weight of the charge was apparent. Dust kicked up into the air. The grass was crushed beneath the hooves, flying up behind them. Compared to how smoothly Enkrid's mount had moved earlier, this was a violent charge. The spear sliced through the air. Zalvan's adjutant and his horse rode past their opponent. Blood sprayed into the air like paint splashed onto a canvas. The horse continued onward, but the rider had left half of his body behind. The upper half of the man holding the spear seemed to be pulled by an invisible string, hanging in the air for a moment before crashing to the ground. Blood and guts stained the grass and earth. He was the first casualty. Though he couldn't hear it, Enkrid spoke as if it didn't matter.
Next.
Enkrid gripped Silver tighter. At the same time, he thought. The charging horseman, the flying spearhead. The heart of the beast gave him courage, and focus point made it seem as if his opponent's movements were cut off. His heightened senses naturally calculated the moment the spearhead would reach him, and he cut. Still, something was ticking at his mind.
Not enough.
Something was lacking. He quickly reviewed the moment and soon realized what needed fixing. What if he had stepped forward a bit more earlier? If he had just taken half a step forward, the force would have transferred more easily. The difference in stride would have affected the power transfer. Enkrid swung the sword, adjusted his grip, and moved as he thought. He widened his stance, corrected his posture, then swung the sword toward empty air. There was no need to swing quickly. He just needed to feel the force transferring at a proper speed. The blade sliced through the air. It stopped precisely at the intended point. Conclusion: this was correct. The difference in stride made the power transfer easier. Enkrid understood it in his mind and engraved it into his body.
Aren't they coming?
He raised his head. Thousands of people had gathered. The army stood watching. Of course, Enkrid wasn't watching the army, but merely raised his head wondering if his next opponent was coming. Why aren't they coming? He simply watched in curiosity. It was the first battle. The first duel. The ones lined up at the back couldn't see well, but those at the front could see everything. Naturally, the enemy troops on the opposite side saw it too. It was normal for their feet to be frozen in place.
A single strike.
Zalvan's brow furrowed. He had 2 adjutants. The one who just went out was less skilled, but still talented enough to hold his own against a knight's squire.
Did he let his guard down, fool?
One of the other adjutants muttered, stepping forward.
Wait.
Zalvan raised his hand. The adjutant halted, reins in hand. Zalvan judged that the opponent's skill was not ordinary, but it was also true that his adjutant had been careless. He wasn't someone who would go down in a single strike. After a brief moment of thought, Zalvan made a decision.
I'll go. Vinu, follow me and support me from behind.
Zalvan wasn't going alone. He would take his adjutant with him. The key was to make it look like the adjutant was merely following a few steps behind to assist. This adjutant's specialty was throwing spears. One well-timed throw would be enough. Even if someone from the other side came to assist, the result wouldn't change. There weren't many who could throw a spear as skillfully as this man.
Let's go.
Zalvan spurred his horse forward, and his adjutant followed closely behind. The guildmaster with Enkrid's group was so astonished that he stood frozen, mouth agape. Only when two enemies emerged from the opposing side did he finally speak.
Shouldn't someone from our side go out too?
He directed his question toward Rem or Ragna.
Ah, not even close.
Rem replied with a yawn. Over the past month, Enkrid had shown them something. There was no need to worry. Ragna, on the other hand, was munching on an apple he had found somewhere. He was chewing it so thoroughly it seemed like he might eat the seeds too. Jackson said nothing. He stood with his arms crossed and his eyes closed. The guildmaster had no idea what he was thinking. That's how he appeared.
Seriously, these people.
Even the main force wasn't sending anyone. The guildmaster turned his gaze to the main force. It was silent. There was some murmuring, but no one looked like they were about to charge in. In fact, they were just watching. Ingis had left, and Marcus had taken over command of the kingdom's army. His palms were sweating. If they lost this duel, they would lose the full-scale battle as well. Once they lost the momentum, there would be no recovery. That was how overwhelming the enemy forces were.
Damn it.
That was his first thought upon hearing the enemy's numbers. After seeing their level of training, even Marcus felt his motivation waver, and that's when Enkrid stepped up. An unexpected moment, an unexpected action. That's how the fight began. Marcus hadn't seen Enkrid fight in a long time, so he was quite surprised.
Was he this good?
The opponent was one of the 5 weapons raised by the Count. Even for an adjutant, his skills were far from ordinary. Yet, in a single strike, his waist was severed. It wasn't luck or exploiting an opening. Enkrid stood directly in front of him, crushing him with superior strength and speed. That much Marcus could recognize. He hesitated for a moment. They were on the edge of a cliff, one misstep and they'd fall. Or it was like standing in a marsh, trying to find solid ground. Both situations were the same. A single wrong move, one bad choice, and it would all be over. That's where this caution came from.
Should I send reinforcements?
Instead of making the decision alone, Marcus asked the knight beside him, Asia.
Just watch.
Asia responded with a grumpy tone, thinking to herself.
I should be the one out there.
Enkrid hadn't said a word, hadn't given any signals, and had stepped out alone to face the enemy without any warning.
I can't just stop everything and tell them to come fight me instead.
For a moment, Asia imagined herself walking up to the enemy, canceling the duel, and demanding they start over. Of course, that was absurd. More than anything, if Enkrid hadn't stepped forward, they would have lost before the fight even began. They had already scouted the enemy's forces. The only thing they hadn't accounted for was the level of their training and the quality of their equipment. The Count's forces were solid, like a rock. The difference in strength was dizzying. It was only natural that everyone had frozen up for a moment after seeing it. The more experience, the more it happened. Did Enkrid go out there not knowing this? That wasn't the case either. Enkrid knew everything, yet didn't hesitate. He ran out alone to take responsibility for starting the battle. Asia admitted defeat, both in terms of skill and in heart.
That bastard.
She thought to herself, watching Enkrid. From afar, she could see the man who had stepped out to fight. The one who had once boasted that his dream was to become a knight, half shattering her own face in the process, and the one who had saved her.
Go on. Kill them all.
Asia mumbled, her inner thoughts slipping out. In the middle of the battlefield, with both armies watching, a battle cry rang out.
Kia.
One of the 5 weapons. It was Zalvin, the one wielding twin spears, charging forward. Even Asia could see it clearly. Enkrid saw the dust floating in the air. He also saw the droplets of blood splattered on the grass, round and distinct. Roughly 10 steps ahead, a man dismounted from his horse in one swift motion. The moment his feet hit the ground, the dust kicked up beneath him, appearing as fine particles to Enkrid's eyes. The grass swayed in the wind. A faint rustling sound could be heard, the sound of blades of grass greeting each other. He could feel the weight of the sword in his hand. He also felt the sensation and weight of his clothes and armor brushing against his body.
A good weight.
He had named the sword in his hand Silver, and today the weight of that sword felt especially satisfying. Looking at the blade, he noticed it was slightly nicked. It could use a good sharpening with a whetstone.
You must be confident in your skills to come this far. What's your name?
The man approaching asked, but Enkrid didn't answer. He simply took in everything around him, savoring it through his senses. The wind brushed his cheek. The sunlight pressed down on his helmet. Ah, that part was a bit annoying. Enkrid took off his helmet. The sunlight and wind felt closer now. There wasn't even a single mound to hide behind on this vast plain. In other words, it was a perfect place for the wind to play. The Norelia Plains were once called the Land of Wind in ancient times. The wind ran across the open earth unimpeded, a never-ending race. A strong gust of wind blew from somewhere. Zalvan instinctively braced his feet. Enkrid relaxed his body. The wind flowed over him, wrapping around him before dispersing. Zalvan frowned. Did his opponent's body just float in the air for a moment, or was it just his imagination? He wanted to rub his eyes. But on the contrary, Zalvan couldn't take his eyes off him for even a second. Even the slightest lapse in concentration, and his opponent's blade would stab into his gut. The previous guy wouldn't have lasted long, even if he hadn't let his guard down. Seeing it up close now, Zalvan was sure of it.
He's the real deal.
His opponent's skill was above his own. Zalvan tightened his grip on his spear. The veins on the back of his hand bulged. He steeled himself and mentally mapped out how the battle would unfold.
Block with the left hand.
In the midst of his thoughts, Zalvan's gaze drifted to Enkrid's waist. He noticed 2 more swords. A belt with daggers strapped across his chest was clearly visible. 3 swords in total. There was no way he carried them for no reason, so he must use those as well. As he observed more closely, Zalvan also saw a knife hidden near his ankle. His opponent stood there, arms dangling loosely, as if blown by the wind.
Again.
Zalvan started over, mentally reenacting the fight from scratch, block with the sword in his left hand, then stab with the spear in his right, faster than anyone else.
No, again.
Sweat began to bead on Zalvan's forehead. This meant he was expending that much mental energy. Once more he reimagined the battle.
Stab with the left, force him to defend.
Then twist the handle of the spear in his right hand. That's it. Use every move he'd prepared. That's the right way. His eyes stung. It was as if he was trapped in a prison where even blinking wasn't allowed. Yet Zalvan endured the pressure skillfully. He was a warrior who had crossed the river of death countless times. This level of pressure was nothing new to him.
I'll kill him.
When he moved, his subordinate, as if an extension of his own body, would throw his spear.
Even I won't be able to stop that.
A spear thrown from outside his field of vision during the fight, and it was coming from a man with top-tier skill. That adjutant could fight as well as most squires. In terms of spear throwing alone, he could even be considered a junior knight. A bead of sweat dropped to the ground. His opponent blinked. Zalvan flinched, his shoulders twitching. Him? At a time like this, when you need all your focus, he's blinking? Relaxing? Blinking his eyes? For a moment, Zalvan almost sprang forward on impulse.
An illusion.
Is it a trick? It's a trick. The moment he judged that, Zalvan pushed off the ground with his feet. He began closing the 10-step gap inch by inch. It was a cautious approach. Enkrid watched the approaching enemy and saw beyond him. Everything remained finely detailed, just as before. His senses still picked up every sensation from his body. However, his field of vision suddenly widened, and he noticed everything around him. First, the man creeping to the side in the back. He'd interfere if things went wrong. The spear strapped to his back was bothersome. He could also see the man approaching cautiously. His slow, hesitant movements were frustrating. A thought crossed his mind at the same time.
If I lose here, it'll be a big blow.
He could already predict the outcome. The enemy's forces were superior, in numbers and in training. The Count had repaired thoroughly. Still, it didn't seem too bad. In the wars of the continent, a few elite soldiers could change the tide. The power of knights could alter the course of a battlefield. The first knight was said to have redefined the meaning of the word knight, which was once tied to titles and ranks. Knights changed the shape of battle. Enkrid was here because he, too, wanted to change something.
Change.
Why did he want to become a knight?
To save and protect.
To fight for what he believed was right and protect those behind him. The moment he grasped a sword, that's how he wanted to live. The words of a bard's song had pierced his heart and became the guidepost of his life. He had walked and walked until this moment. The dawn had left its mark on his faded and tattered dreams. Ignoring the opponent's cautious steps, Enkrid began striding forward. His feet kicked the ground as he walked, almost as if he were half running. Yet he didn't appear to be moving in a hurry. As he swung his arms, the sword in his hand swayed along with them. The distance between the two narrowed to within 5 steps. Zalvin kicked off the ground.
Kia.
Zalvin thrust his spear with his left hand. Enkrid gripped silver, twisting his wrist as he blocked diagonally in front of his chest. Just because a strike is soft doesn't mean the blade becomes fluff. The moment the blade met the tip of the spear, he let the force flow through. The sword absorbed the spear's power and continued forward. He saw the enemy's eyes. Brown, bloodshot eyes. Was it particularly dry today? What's wrong with this guy's eyes? Random thoughts intruded. The enemy lifted his right hand to thrust. It didn't reach him. Still, the man pretended to stab forward. With a loud blast, the tip of the spear was launched. It was a specially equipped weapon. Instead of pushing the flowing sword, Enkrid pulled it back. It takes longer to explain than it happened. It was an incredibly brief moment. Zalvan thrust with his left hand, shot the spear with his right, and there were 2 metallic clangs. Immediately after, the sound of flesh tearing followed. Enkrid blocked twice and swung once, all with the sword in his right hand. His third strike pierced through the enemy's chest. Zalvan had layered several pieces of leather armor, and he wore thick inner clothing that served as additional armor, but Enkrid's sword cut through all of it, slicing into muscle and flesh, leaving a mark on his chest, precisely where the heart was. The blood vessels in the enemy's eyes bulged even more.
Gah.
Coughing up blood, Zalvan staggered back a few steps before collapsing, his knees hitting the ground.
Gah.
Only then did the man behind Zalvan throw his spear. It flew straight for Enkrid's face. The pressure of the air hit his face first with a swoosh. Enkrid struck downward with his sword. The spear struck the path of the sword and was deflected to the side, rolling across the ground. The adjutant, who had been preparing to throw a second spear, froze in place. It was clear that even if he threw another, the result wouldn't be any different. His body stiffened on its own. In the end, Enkrid swung his sword a 4th time, finishing the fight. Zalvan watched as the ground approached his face. His world turned red, and he thought
There was a gap in our skills from the start.
his opponent was on a different level. He had attacked twice, and one of those was an unexpected shot with his spear, yet his opponent blocked it effortlessly. How did it turn out like this? The reason was simple. Enkrid had been faster and more precise. They had built themselves differently. That was Zalvan's final conclusion. Enkrid flicked his sword in the air. The man who had thrown the spear hadn't attacked again, nor did he flee. He simply rolled his eyes in fear.
Not going to fight.
Enkrid asked him calmly and casually. It wasn't a taunt or a demand, just a question to gauge his intentions. At that moment, the adjutant, who had been clutching his spear, hesitated as a strange tension hung in the air.
Madman.
Suddenly, an impatient man from the enemy side charged forward, yanking on his reins as he rushed ahead. The rider seemed like he would charge straight in, but he pulled his reins 20 steps away. From atop his horse, he drew his bow and aimed. He was quite skilled. Mounted archers were a rare sight. An arrow shot while closing the distance would be as fast as a flash of light. Enkrid watched the enemy fire the arrow and shook his left hand. He naturally imbued the motion with intent. He sped up the motion of drawing and throwing his sword. The sword and arrow crossed paths, following different trajectories. A satisfying sound echoed. The archer, 20 steps away, was struck by Enkrid's sword just after releasing his arrow. His body lifted slightly behind his horse. The sword that Enkrid had thrown had flown straight into the enemy's chest. Though the arrow flying toward him was just a speck to Enkrid, it was still within his perception. Without hesitation, he had thrown his sword and rolled to the side to dodge. The arrow embedded itself into the ground. Meanwhile, the horse, now riderless, galloped off to the side. The horse let out a long cry as if it knew its rider had died. The man hit in the chest by the sword was thrown off his horse and rolled across the ground, his blood soaking the grass. Enkrid calmly walked over and pulled out his gladius. There was a sickening crack as ribs were split and broken. But what if the enemy he had just defeated had been given 3 more chances today? Enkrid felt as though he could prove it here. Instead of 3 more days, he had condensed all of it into 1 month. Today Enkrid felt unusually light. The adjutant, holding a spear, hesitated and finally retreated. The opponent didn't pursue. It was as if they were saying, "Come at me if you dare." He quietly wiped the blood from his sword and returned to his original position without a word. The horse he rode on whinnied once beside him. The horse had an imposing build and eyes that were far from ordinary. The adjutant had witnessed all of this and backed away, returning the way he had come, trembling. Watching the adjutant retreat, Learbart struck his sword against the horse.
You should have fought to the death instead.
The skull split in two. Learbart withdrew his sword. With a wet squelch, the sword came free, leaving a long stream of blood trailing behind it.
Stupid Zalvan.
A clear voice from the side cursed the dead man. It was the fairy warrior, Bannet. Her short blonde hair was cut as short as a man's, and her voice held no emotion, just cold logic. It was her signature way of speaking. Her cold, venomous words betrayed no hint of feeling.
He was the weakest among us. I'll take care of it.
Bannet stepped forward, but Learbart shook his head.
I'll go.
Did the other side want to build momentum by sending just that one guy? Then he'd crush them himself. Aside from Count Molson, Learbart held the highest rank here, second in command. He didn't need anyone's permission. Bannet nodded with the same emotionless expression. Her face gave no clue to her feelings as usual for fairies. Malton remained silent, and Bennict seemed indifferent.
Let me fight.
Bennict had the blood of giants flowing in his veins, and he never tried to suppress his lust for slaughter.
If I kill him, charge all at once.
It would be that way. Learbart gave the command and began to move his horse. He gripped the reins and urged the horse forward at a brisk trot. He dismounted at the spot where two corpses now lay. He glanced at the dead Zalvan. Learbart then dismounted and checked his equipment. He adjusted his sword belt, grabbed a short sword, and fastened a thick machete with a single-edged blade behind his waist. It was a magical weapon. He also secured a plain kite shield to his left arm. The shield wasn't held by a handle but fixed to his gauntlet, its size slightly reduced. Even so, it was heavy enough that only someone confident in their strength would use it. As Learbart moved, there was a clinking sound. It was the noise of his armor, plate armor over a gambeson. With his preparations complete, he advanced. Even then, his opponents simply stood there, quietly watching him. Learbart found those eyes irritating and asked,
What's your name?
Enkrid.
Learbart.
It was the first time Enkrid had heard the name. The Count's 5 blades were quite famous within their own territory, but didn't operate much beyond it. Their names weren't widely known. In contrast, Enkrid was several times more renowned.
Looks like I've already won.
After coming to this conclusion, Enkrid spoke up.
We haven't even started.
I said that because my name is more famous.
What the hell? It wasn't that Enkrid was truly crazy. It was a simple taunt intended to break Learbart's composure. He felt it was necessary. The way Learbart walked, prepared his equipment, and initiated conversation, everything about him showed he was a formidable opponent.
A madman platoon, they say.
Jealous.
Learbart paused for a moment. Jealous. Honestly speaking, is there anyone who wouldn't want to build a reputation and have their name known far and wide? Even without an overwhelming desire for fame, it was still appealing, and Learbart was an ambitious man. He had plenty of experience, too. He realized he had fallen for the verbal trick.
You're a real piece of work, aren't you? I'm tough to chew.
Is he saying he's too tough to bite through? Learbart, being sharp with words himself, quickly grasped Enkrid's meaning. That made him even angrier.
All right, I'll kill you.
Learbart stepped forward and swung his sword in a diagonal slash. To Enkrid's eyes, the sword was neither particularly fast nor intricate, revealing an opening. Seeing it, he moved. Enkrid put power into his first strike. In an instant, he thrust Ember forward like a glowing needle, aiming for the opponent's sword-wielding arm. Learbart, mid-swing, pulled his left arm with the kite shield to block it. Ember was blocked. The shield was unpierced. The material was no ordinary substance, and the wielder's skill was remarkable. As Enkrid withdrew Ember, Learbart's sword came flying at him. It was a simple thrust, no sudden acceleration or disruptive motion. Instead, it was calm and precise. If Enkrid remained still, it would graze his throat, so he bent backward, avoiding it by the narrowest margin. He expected the sword to drop down, so he prepared with silver, but Leobart pulled the sword back and adjusted his stance, raising his shield once again. Had he charged recklessly, he might have gained the advantage, right? Enkrid had several countermeasures ready for such a scenario, but despite seeing the opening, his opponent did not charge. As Enkrid straightened from his evasive position, he gazed at the visor of Leobart's helmet. Through the slit, Leobart's eyes were visible.
A trick?
Was he pretending to be calm? No, his opponent was serious. Bring 10 knights to walk the path of knighthood, and each will take a different route. That's what makes the knight's path so arduous and challenging. Following the path of another won't necessarily yield the same results. It's the same for junior knights. Each had their own way. Leobart's path was sturdier and more stable than most. He wore thick plate armor and carried a shield. He only thrust and slashed, but never attacked without a perfect opportunity. No risk. Even if there were a stone bridge built on steel pillars, he would take a longer route rather than cross it. On this firm foundation, he completed his swordsmanship with the weapon of the tongue. After Enkrid's initial taunt, he had fallen silent. Leobart's defense was solid. Ember couldn't pierce it, silver couldn't cut it, and the whistle dagger he threw found its mark blocked by the helmet. It wasn't just that he was wearing armor, he skillfully used his body's defenses. That was impressive. All the while, Leobart continued to speak.
You dream of being a knight, don't you?
Enkrid retrieved Ember and gripped silver with both hands. It was the crushing sword, a technique that pressed down and overwhelmed the opponent with sheer force. Leobart raised his shield to meet the blow. The sound wasn't one of an intense clash, but rather a somewhat muffled impact. The blade of silver struck Leobart's shield. As the sword hit, Enkrid pressed down with all his might, utilizing the crushing sword technique. Leobart angled his shield, deflecting the blade to the side. He blocked it and stepped back. He wasn't overwhelmed by the force of the crushing sword. His stance and skills were as firm as his armor.
So, are you satisfied with the path you've walked so far?
Leobart's words came through, but Enkrid only moved for the next attack. If crushing sword didn't work, then it was time for the trapping sword. It was a battle of strategies now. But no matter how unique Enkrid's moves were, Leobart's armor and shield neutralized them. A soft light emanated from both the shield and armor, clearly enchanted magical gear.
Would Severin split them?
If no tactic worked, it was time to put all his strength into a single blow. If he imbued it with the will to cut through anything, a mimicry of true intent. Though Enkrid couldn't fully embody that will, he could substitute it with the heart of great strength to strike down with incredible force. As soon as he thought about it, he acted. It was a slash based on Ragnar's technique, combined with the spiral slash of the middle sword technique. He planted his feet firmly on the ground, twisted his waist, and transmitted all his power to the sword. Just as he was about to unleash it with full force, Leobart, despite wearing armor, charged swiftly, attempting to body-check him. If he followed through with the slash, at best, it might only graze Leobart's arm. Enkrid had to retreat. His stance faltered momentarily, but Leobart didn't press the attack. He gripped his shield and readied his posture once again. He lowered his knees, shifting his weight downward, his eyes locked on his opponent, always ready to thrust or slash, a troublesome foe.
If the path you've chosen turns out to be wrong, what will you do?
Leobart spoke. Enkrid looked at him and thought. His opponent's skill was equal to his own, but he focused solely on defense. What did this situation imply? He seemed to understand his opponent's strategy.
The path to knighthood is rough. It's a thorny road, a path where you embrace brambles and leap off cliffs. Even one misstep and you'll never reach that ideal. You have to jump off the cliff holding brambles every single time.
Leobart spoke steadily, his breathing unchanging. He was preparing for a long fight, using his armor and shield to nullify his opponent's attacks, all while continuing to speak, never showing a disruption in his breathing. It was a strategy that contradicted his nickname of a fiend, instead showing nothing but stability. Yet it was still threatening. Leobart's shield and armor seemed like an impenetrable steel wall. That was clearly his intention. More importantly, he kept speaking, constantly attempting to unsettle his opponent's psyche. He searched for weaknesses, ready to exploit them, with both words and his sword.
Every time you take the wrong path, you lose your talent and the strength to continue. That's why talent alone doesn't make a knight. So, tell me, How far do you think you can go with just that fine talent and luck?
Especially notable was how much he talked. He had quickly understood the initial taunt and countered it skillfully. This man, too, wielded words as a weapon.
A knight? It's a dream that drifts further away. Like a picture of grapes, visible but unreachable. Like a star in the sky, no matter how much you desire it, you can't grasp it. You've stepped into a hopeless dream. Fairy tales don't happen in the real world.
He used his words as both spear and sword. Instead of responding, Enkrid repeated his previous attack. He thrust with Ember. His opponent reacted to the sudden acceleration, and the shield blocked it again. The crushing sword was also stopped. Even if a mountain fell on him, Leerbart was the type of man who could endure it. The trapping sword yielded the same result. Leerbart didn't falter. He refused to engage in the tactical battle, cutting it off midway. He shoved his shield forward to forcefully block the path of Enkrid's sword while continuing his speech.
If you walk barefoot on a thorny path, your feet will fester, burst, and rot. You'll lose your feet. You could avoid that path, so why do it?
Leerbart was persistent. He continued speaking, even without getting an answer. Enkrid finally responded to his relentlessness.
You're obnoxiously loud.
The truth was, Enkrid wasn't shaken by his opponent's words, so he could afford to respond.
Loud, you say? Take a look at yourself. If these words sting, it means deep down you already accept them.
You're practically slapbeticking the face of a sage with those words.
Enkrid took 2 steps back, adjusted his stance, and repositioned himself. He put his left foot forward and his right foot back, adopting the most basic stance. He raised the tip of his sword toward the sky as if to pierce it.
What if the path you've chosen is wrong? I've said it repeatedly. What will you do if your talent fades and you lose your way?
His false concern was perfectly delivered.
I'll just start again.
Leerbart blinked. Hadn't he been saying all along that this wasn't possible? The exchange continued in a similar fashion. Thorns, lost talent, a mistaken dream of knighthood.
I said I'll just start again.
It's often said that a fight between attack and defense is like a battle between spear and shield. If their swords had been that until now, this was a battle of their words. The roles had simply reversed. With the sword, Enkrid was on the offensive, while Leerbart defended. In conversation, Leerbart attacked while Enkrid defended. Enkrid consistently, calmly repeated similar answers.
I'll just do it again. I'll do it again if I have to. Losing your way is just part of life. I don't need shortcuts. I'll just start again.
There was something here stronger than Leerbart's armor and shield. It was the will to persevere, a force that naturally arose from a firm resolve. Enkrid's start again wasn't about repeating today. Even without that, he would continue forward. Because even without certainty, he had lived through today, tomorrow, and every day in this way. When he swung his sword until his palms bled, did he ever truly believe this path was right, that it was the correct one? There was no such certainty. He just repeated and walked, step after step, every day. In that way there was a dream touched by the dawn, a lingering trace of it. If there had been 3 more days, he would have surpassed the stagnant level of a junior knight. The days he repeated while crossing Asia were also a doorway to a new world. Afterward, there was a month's time. Enkrid, from his stance poised to strike the heavens, swung his sword. He captured and pressed down. He blended the trapping sword with the crushing sword, a feat performed with the sword in his right hand. The fluid sword technique was difficult to execute. His opponent wasn't attacking but focused entirely on enduring and blocking, so he hammered down with everything he had. His left hand, accustomed to speed, struck with momentary acceleration. It was a skill that required splitting his thoughts to act simultaneously. With strain on his right arm's muscles, he brought the sword down. Before the echo of steel faded, he thrust with Ember. The thrust aimed at his opponent's shoulder failed as Ember met the shield. Silver, too, failed to break through or cut, but that was fine, because he could do it again. Enkrid repeated the motion. The strategy of a long fight meant Leerbart was confident in his endurance, but Enkrid was the same. He held his breath, inviting his opponent into a world of no breathing, and repeated the attack. Strike, thrust, strike, thrust, strike, thrust. Leerbart blocked and endured, over and over again. Before they knew it, their swordplay had become the battle of endurance. Naturally, the words stopped. In the midst of the battlefield, clang, thud, Only the sound of steel echoed. The horn calls and drums ceased, leaving only the sound of clashing metal to represent all the noise of the battlefield. One of the squad leaders under the command of the Royal Capital Defense Force, Rearban, knew Enkrid. They had spent a few months together during Enkrid's time in the capital. Of course, he recognized his face. It wasn't the kind of face one could easily forget. Enkrid came into view of Rearban, who was standing at the front, and naturally, their past conversations resurfaced.
Do you want to become a knight?
He had laughed.
It would be better if you found another path.
He had even offered him sincere advice. There was no reply. Enkrid simply swung his sword. He was always in the same place, whether it rained or snowed.
Teach me how to wield the sword.
He was the kind of man who never stopped begging for instruction. It was remarkable how confident he looked doing it. More people started to mock him. More people started to shun him. There was even a time when a mercenary, who had just picked up a sword, joined them. The mercenaries often gathered at a particular tavern, and Enkrid was there too. At first, the novice swordsman was hesitant, but his skills improved rapidly. The kid had talent. Soon, he surpassed Enkrid in skill and mocked him during their sparring.
Seriously, swinging that sword around and you're still only at this level? I don't get it. Maybe it's time to give up.
The face of the guy who laughed while sneering was vivid in his memory. What was his name again? He couldn't remember, but he vividly recalled the expression Enkrid had when facing that guy. Enkrid neither got angry nor fell into despair. He was indifferent, calm and composed. But was he really? Was his heart not crumbling and rotting away inside? Rearban had observed him, not with any particular intent, just out of curiosity. The next day, Enkrid was swinging his sword again. More and more people began to look down on him.
Why do you keep hanging around that guy?
Someone asked Rearban that, seeing him near Enkrid. It wasn't as though he was defending Enkrid.
None of your business, is it?
It just happened that the people who gathered around were irritating. Even after that, Enkrid didn't change. Even when he was beaten close to death, even when others surpassed him, he swung his sword over and over. For what?
A knight.
Was that even a reasonable thought? A third-rate, at best a second-rate swordsman, aiming to be a knight. Among those whose talents reached the heavens and who were called geniuses, only a handful. That's what it meant to be a knight.
Get your head straight.
Rearban had said it half out of pity, but of course Enkrid didn't listen. Back then, Enkrid was somewhat famous, for his childish sense of justice and recklessness, for his unchangeable mediocre talent. Those things were all that defined the name Enkrid. Rearban looked at the enemy soldiers arrayed far away. The first thought he had upon seeing that army was to flee.
We can't handle this.
Their numbers were overwhelming. It was a well-disciplined army. The Count's forces, now called rebels. They would soon be the ones he had to fight. His long experience as a mercenary and his time with the Capital Defense Force told him the truth. If they fought here, they would die. It would be a meaningless death.
Why am I standing here?
Was it for some juvenile sense of justice, or was it for a handful of gold coins? Neither, really. Even when he gave up being a mercenary, there hadn't been any grand reason. He had gotten married and had a child. There was a woman who spoke of love while gazing at the moon and the petals. There was a child who called him Dad.
Why do you go to such lengths? Your hand is bleeding.
Rearban had asked Enkrid. Why did he go that far? Why did he train as if his life depended on it? Why didn't he back down, even after getting beaten? Deep down, Rearban knew the answer. It was protection.
Guard the ones behind you. Don't turn your back on honor. Stand firm in your beliefs.
Those were the reckless words Enkrid would always speak. Even if he didn't say it out loud, his body would shout it out. While helping to clean up after the incident at the royal palace, Rearban had seen a few corpses. One of them was the bastard who had beaten Enkrid and done all sorts of terrible things to him. The man who had tormented others under the title of instructor was scattered across the ground in pieces.
Should I say it was a good death?
The name of the one who killed him was Enkrid, a name defined by mediocre talent. Rearban was dazzled. Even though the sunlight wasn't blinding, it felt like it. There are people in this world who shine so brightly, they are almost impossible to look at. It doesn't matter if you call them heroes or stars that radiate brilliance. They stand firm in their place and prove themselves.
Enkrid.
He repeated the name silently. He watched as Enkrid stepped forward into the fight. It was clear. Even though it was dazzling, nothing obstructed his view of him. Regressing couldn't make out the ebb and flow of the battle with his own eyes, but there was one thing he understood. It was fierce, incredibly fierce, as if Enkrid had thrown his entire life into it. Blood spattered, sparks flew into the sky. The enemy facing Enkrid dropped their sword and drew a secondary weapon from their waist. It was a machete. Enkrid swung his sword to meet it. A deafening sound exploded. The shockwave seemed to ripple out like concentric circles. Goosebumps covered his body. Every hair on his body stood on end. Regressing forgot the despair he had felt when facing the enemy and could only watch Enkrid's back. He was alone. Alone he stood against the enemy force that no one dared to face. He cut down many, and then he swung his sword at the next one who stepped forward. A burst of light erupted between the two combatants. Enkrid's body flew backward, tumbling to the ground. His opponent merely took a few steps back, thudding heavily with each step. Regressing could see Enkrid, who had rolled across the ground. He knew that Enkrid was not the kind of person who would stop just because he had fallen. Regressing struck the ground with the butt of his spear. And then he repeated the action.
For no Relia,
he muttered. Words that would not be heard, words that would not reach anyone. They were simply for himself. For the country, for the people, for his wife, for his child. He stood in this place for all of that, to protect those behind him. The soldiers around him began to follow his actions, striking the ground with their spear butts one by one. Thud, 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 thud. The disjointed rhythm naturally fell into sync. It wasn't a command from the commander. They had all been moved by the sight of the battle unfolding in front of them.
For my own shining hero as well.
Regressing muttered silently as he struck the ground with his spear, and then Enkrid, who had fallen, stood up. It looked as though some words passed between the two fighters, but Regressing couldn't hear them. Only the sound of spears hitting the ground echoed. Relentlessly pressing forward without a breath, it was Regressing who first introduced a new variable. He abandoned his sword and swung his machete. Enkrid neither slowed down nor tried to catch his breath. He swung silver with all his might. Though his form wasn't perfect, it was a strike that unleashed the heart of great strength. A sword strike that surpassed the limits of human strength. The moment their weapons clashed, an invisible force exploded from the machete's blade, striking Enkrid's abdomen and chest. It was too sudden and too close to deflect. Enkrid gritted his teeth, absorbing the blow with his body as he finally brought his sword down. That was the result now. His body flew backward while his opponent took a few steps back. As Enkrid tumbled through the air, the world seemed to spin around him. He was aware that he had been knocked back, so he quickly regained his balance. However, even after he stood up and regained his stance, the sky continued to spin. The ground swirled too. His opponent's figure seemed to stretch and warp. Something hot surged up from inside him and he spat it out.
Blag.
He vomited a handful of blood, and the dizziness vanished, making him feel better.
What was that?
And then, he asked.
It's a magic sword,
Regressing replied. Enkrid didn't think it was unfair. As Enkrid stood up, the thudding sound that had been reverberating through the air for some time now filled the atmosphere. It strangely resembled the beating of his own heart. Oddly enough, it sounded like a battle chant.
My chest feels a bit sore.
His head was spinning. But did that really matter? No, not at all. After asking and answering himself, Enkrid picked up his sword. He was determined to see this to the end. Regressing glanced at his dented shoulder plate and breastplate.
Is this the difference in talent?
Regressing set aside his fleeting thoughts and looked at Enkrid. His opponent seemed larger than before. It could be the difference in willpower, but it was more likely the presence of discipline. Of course, he could push forward and end it here, but there was no need. Giving a day's respite wouldn't hurt. Even for the sake of what the Count truly desired, it would be wise to grant another day. For these reasons, Regressing chose to purely acknowledge his defeat. He also admitted that if they continued fighting, he would lose.
You've won.
That's why he said those words. It was an unexpected statement. Enkrid merely stared at his opponent.
The goddess of luck is still with you today,
Regressing said, his voice tinged with deep regret. More than regret, his words carried a bitter resentment toward the world.
But it doesn't matter. Nothing will change.
You're done talking.
Enkrid's words cut off Learbart's monologue.
This is it for today. The thrill is gone.
The thudding sound of spears striking the ground still echoed around them. To Learbart, that sound felt like it was saying, "Protect this man, Enkrid." Most importantly, people had gathered closer during their fight. Rem, Ragna, Asia, and Dunbachel were nearby. On the other side, Malton, Bennocht, and Bannet were present. All the key players from both armies had gathered.
No, there's one more,
he thought. A figure possessing assassination skills beyond the elite. With senses far surpassing human limits, Learbart pinpointed the location of this individual. Under the shadow cast by a horse's figure, someone was subtly hiding using the horse's body. Once the figure made eye contact with Learbart, he stepped out to the side. It seemed he didn't mind revealing himself. Naturally, it was Jackson.
It would be a waste to burn everything here. You should know that battles aren't just fought with swords.
Learbart said before turning away. He gestured toward his loyal black horse, which had been with him for years, and the horse approached. Learbart picked up his fallen sword, packed his gear onto the horse, and mounted it.
Boring, aren't you?
Enkrid taunted, but Learbart didn't respond.
It won't be boring next time,
he replied. For someone who had just admitted defeat, Learbart's spirit was completely unshaken. Their eyes met. Learbart cursed the goddess of luck as he thought of her. Enkrid looked at his opponent, wondering if this was really the end of it. His instincts told him this wasn't everything.
The battle is tomorrow. It will begin at dawn. This is the honor I show you for defeating me.
With those words, Learbart turned and walked away. Enkrid watched him. Would it be right to strike him in the back now? No, that didn't sit well with him. He didn't do things he didn't like. It didn't feel like the right course of action, and it wouldn't mean anything either. He knew this instinctively and rationally. If the enemy started a full-on assault now, their side would be at a disadvantage. He should be grateful that the enemy was withdrawing and hand them a silver coin as thanks. A unit was striking the ground with their spear butts. Their morale was high, but that was all. Even with raised spirits, their numbers wouldn't increase. If they engaged in an unorganized skirmish without proper preparation, the smaller force would be at a disadvantage. To increase their chances of victory, they needed time. Enkrid understood that. To buy time, regroup, and form a solid formation would give them at least a slight advantage. This instinct led him to step forward. So, fighting Learbart now would be pointless. Enkrid also turned away. With both of them walking away, the distance between them quickly widened.
Why did you come out to meet me?
Enkrid asked when he saw the group waiting for him, halfway between the main force and himself.
To chop some axes of revenge into your corpse if you died,
Rem said.
That no-breath technique was impressive,
Ragna added, holding an apple core.
There's not a single one of them that's easy, huh?
Dunbachel remarked while glancing at Enkrid's back. Finally, Asia stared at Enkrid for a moment before saying,
You're one hell of a bastard.
The exact meaning wasn't clear, but he got the gist. It was said in recognition of his skill. What had Enkrid shown? It was proof that when facing a junior knight, 3 days like this would be enough, and he had etched his name into the minds of everyone who had witnessed him. Without morale, there would be nothing left for this unit, and Enkrid had built that morale. Thud, 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 thud. The sound of spear butts striking the ground in time with the beating of his heart echoed. Enkrid listened to that sound as he returned to the main force. No one spoke to him, but everyone was watching him.
How was it? Strong, he's better than I am.
So?
I have to kill him.
Do it then.
Learbart returned to the Count, who asked and spoke in a bored tone. The full-scale battle was postponed until the next morning. That was fine. In fact, it was exactly what the Count wanted. Marcus, having gained the support of Krang, was now the supreme commander of the main forces. He understood the value of the time Enkrid had bought them. It was just a single day, but there was much that could be done.
Summon all the unit commanders.
It was time for tactics and strategy. Was this his strong suit? It didn't matter if it wasn't. What should he do then? Simply gather those who excelled in such skills.
The scouts will continue to monitor the enemy's movements without rest, while the rest of the troops are to take a break. Let them eat and rest, but keep their weapons close at all times, ready to arm themselves.
Marcus shouted commands without pause. Krang, Observing this recalled the Enkrid he had seen just moments ago. It gave him chills. There stood someone who had shown his back to the battlefield. Krang called such a person a knight, the kind of knight spoken of by bards. Not a symbol of strength, but a symbol of honor and conviction. Those who took up the sword for what they believed in, guardians of the pact. Enkrid wasn't part of the plan Krang had prepared. Nevertheless, Krang believed in him. He wanted to make him an Alwyrkt. His intent had gone as he wished. Still, Krang wasn't sure if Enkrid was someone he could truly embrace as an ally.
Can I truly accept him?
He desired it. He wanted to keep him close. A burning urge rose within him, but Krang quickly set aside his greed. There was a better way, so that would suffice.
It's fine even if I don't embrace him.
What about staying as friends? That wouldn't be bad so. A friend he would be, just as the hero returned.
Enki.
Krang was the first to greet him. Marcus also turned to look at him. All Enkrid had done was cut down a few enemy soldiers and engage in a seemingly even fight with an enemy commander, but the power he displayed left a lasting impression on everyone. Moreover, his battle had raised the morale of the troops. This was within the command tent where they were formulating the battle plans. Seeing Krang raise his hand, Enkrid gave a slight nod in response. Even if they called each other friends, it wouldn't be right to casually address each other by name in such a setting. Enkrid, being perceptive, knew how to act according to the situation. Of course, even if he had addressed Krang by name, no one would have dared to criticize him. He was perceptive, yet hadn't fully realized the impact of his own actions. Krang saw this as one of Enkrid's characteristics. It was a thought that crossed his mind as he guessed why Enkrid hadn't called him by name. Soon, commanders worthy of the title began to enter the tent, one by one. One of them stepped forward.
Put me at the front.
Baron Rudin was a man who had always dreamed of joining the knights. His blood boiled as he witnessed someone standing alone against a well-disciplined army of thousands. If his blood didn't boil, he wouldn't be human. Fire burned in his eyes.
Restrain yourself.
Marcus, observing this, spoke. Regardless of strategy or tactics, Marcus knew what needed to be done now. He intended to tip the scales with a single battle. That meant he had to use every measure he had prepared.
The Count's hidden hand may not be revealed yet, but the fact remains that we must fight. We will fight by holding together as one.
Marcus laid out the overall strategy, with those skilled in tactics filling in the details. At the core of this was Enkrid's madman platoon, yet no one could tell them how to move. A brilliant strategist could ensure that every soldier moved without rest, that they understood what their role was and acted accordingly. However, there were some who didn't require such orders. Those who operated outside the usual bounds of behavior, finding their own place in the battle. Enkrid was one of them. Thus Marcus said nothing. There was no need for orders. While positions were being assigned, Enkrid was simply passed over for this reason. Though Enkrid and his forces were only a platoon in terms of numbers, no one thought of them as merely a platoon. Everyone had seen and now knew. His skills were real, and the title of hero of the border guard was no empty boast. The strategic meeting was coming to a close, with the battle's direction set.
The madman platoon will move on its own, won't they?
Marcus needed reassurance for his conviction. He wanted to hear it. Would they act as a single blade, cutting down the enemy for their lord? Was his judgment correct? Would they find their place in the battle, even if it was beyond the normal bounds?
Yes, they will.
Marcus felt reassured, even though the answer was simple. Enkrid, who had nodded, returned to his assigned tent. It was quite large. In front of the tent, Rem, sitting by a campfire, was making something.
Looks like we're going to have a tough time starting tomorrow.
The warrior, often called a barbarian, spoke based on his instincts. He wasn't wrong. It would probably be rough and dangerous.
Are you excited to the point of death?
How'd you know?
It's written all over your face.
Enkrid sat on a flat stone seat that Rem had prepared at a suitable height. Rem had quite the talent for finding and making things like this.
Where's my seat?
Ragna asked as he came out of the tent. Rem told him to get lost in a roundabout way.
Did you leave it with me? Is this because you twisted your ankle and got beat up last time, and now you're taking it out on us?
Ragna's comment referred to when he had captured the so-called immortal madman and got injured. It was a persistent tease. Rem ignored him, and Ragna eventually found a similar stone and placed it beside Enkrid before sitting down. Jackson was smarter than that. He had carved a piece of wood, whittling it down to resemble a chair. If they were going to go this far, wouldn't it have been better to ask a friend in charge of supplies for a simple folding chair? Dunbachel just sat on the ground. It actually seemed more comfortable that way. Esther, in the form of a panther, snuggled into Enkrid's arms. While wiping himself down with a damp cloth, Enkrid watched Rem work. It seemed like he had either threatened the supply officer with an axe or had gone hunting as he had brought back fresh meat, something rare for regular soldiers to see. He scored the meat with a small knife, sprinkled salt in between the cuts, and wrapped it in a clean cloth. Seeing Enkrid staring intently, Rem opened his mouth.
If you do this, the remaining blood drains out and the meat becomes more tender.
Sounds delicious.
When Enkrid responded, Rem looked around. At some point, even Asia had joined them, claiming a spot. She was the only one who had actually gotten a chair from the supply officer. The chair was simple in structure, with legs that spread out when unfolded, and the fabric stretched taut across them. It was fragile but easy to make.
What are you making?
Asia asked, still friendly. Her personality didn't seem to have changed, and she seemed like someone who had many friends around her. Though she had been blindsided by someone, hadn't she? What was the name of that junior knight who threw a wrench into things? Enkrid tried to recall, then gave up. He couldn't remember at all.
Only the ones who aren't cocky will get some,
Rem said. Though he spoke like that, he would share it with everyone. He wasn't as stingy as he pretended to be. Ragna, after thinking for a moment, frowned and said,
If you give me some, I'll forget about that incident.
He was saying he'd stop teasing Rem about the injured leg. Judging by the looks exchanged, it seemed like Ragna had relentlessly teased him while Enkrid wasn't around. They were all a bit crazy. The fact that getting injured in battle became something to mock, and the way they responded to that teasing with anger. Both were insane.
I'll let you off,
Rem replied. Ragna was particular about his food, and he understood how important Rem's cooking was, so he backed off a little. Enkrid simply observed quietly. When Rem sprinkled salt on the meat, Jackson wordlessly tossed a small pouch over. It was, of course, a sign that he wanted to eat the food. Catching the pouch with a thud, Rem puckered his lips and said,
You bastard.
It sounded almost like a compliment. Jackson naturally ignored him. The pouch Jackson had thrown contained spices. As Rem sprinkled them over the meat, a fragrant aroma spread through the air. It seemed to be a blend of herbs.
If you poisoned it, you're dead,
Rem muttered, smiling as he said it, indicating it was a joke. Jackson ignored him again and sat next to Enkrid. Dunbachel quietly helped Rem with the preparation.
Don't use your nails. Did you wash your hands?
I'll use a knife.
Dunbachel was unusually well behaved. The meat, scored and seasoned with salt and spices, was then wrapped in a cloth that quickly became stained red. After unwrapping it, they patted it dry with another cloth. They used stones to surround the campfire, creating a platform to place something on. Out of nowhere, Rem produced a cast iron pan and placed it on top. He then poured flaxseed oil onto the pan.
This stuff is precious,
Rem said. As Rem spoke, Enkrid nodded in agreement. Here Rem's word was law, if only for a while. Once the pan was properly heated, the oil spread evenly and the aroma began to fill the air. Rem placed the meat onto the cast iron pan. The sound of searing meat filled the air as the savory scent mingled with the aroma of the oil, quickly overpowering their senses, going beyond the nose and striking the brain. Saliva began to fill their mouths. Enkrid let out a small sound of appreciation, and Rem stared intently at the meat. He was more serious than ever, though his hands moved with remarkable speed and precision. He flipped the meat over. The surface had browned to a deep color, firming up as it cooked. With white smoke rising, he cooked the other side. Eventually, he even used a metal skewer to pierce the sides of the meat and cook them as well. Once he deemed it done, he transferred the chunk of meat onto a clean wooden board. Dunbachel's hand immediately reached for it.
You'll die if you eat that now. Wait.
Rem said without even looking.
Ugh, why?
Because it tastes better if you wait.
For Rem, this was a surprisingly reasonable explanation delivered in a soft tone. Dunbachel relented. After grilling several more pieces of meat, Rem started slicing the first one. The inside was red, while the outside was brown.
I made sure to bring a cut with high-fat content. This is beef.
Where'd you get it?
There was fresh meat around, probably from meeting a group of nomads or something.
As he spoke, Rem sliced the meat into smaller pieces.
Dig in.
With arms crossed, Rem gave the go-ahead. Enkrid, moving with sudden speed, focused his attention. He stabbed quickly, skewering a thick piece of meat with a wooden skewer. He put it into his mouth and chewed. The juices burst forth. The rich flavor of the meat flooded his senses, reaching from his nose to his brain. If the aroma had stimulated his salivary glands, the taste assaulted his palate. Every hair on his body reacted. This was it. This was real cooking, real meat. The tender flesh moved between his teeth and slid down his throat effortlessly.
What was that?
A dream? When did it go down? Enkrid immediately moved the skewer for another bite.
There's plenty.
Rem said. They ate heartily. Every one of them was a big eater. They needed to eat as much as they moved, so it was natural. They kept eating until they were full and only stopped when they had to pat their bellies. Even Jackson, who usually stayed quiet, silently kept chewing and swallowing the meat. It was an unexpected feast.
Well, now that we've eaten well, we'll have a proper go tomorrow morning,
Rem said, patting his belly.
You took the words out of my mouth.
Enkrid replied.
That was a good meal. Enkrid, I saw your fight earlier today. It was impressive.
Asia said before leaving first. It wasn't a night where anything in particular needed doing. Everyone spent their time as they saw fit. Ragna had no thoughts. Rem was filled with anticipation. Jackson used the excuse of a walk and stepped out for a while. As he walked in the night air, a shadow suddenly appeared from one side. It was his lover and the guild's contact.
Do you really need to go this far?
It was a sudden question. In truth, it was something she couldn't understand.
This will be the last,
Jackson answered. It was in response to her asking why he was going into battle under Enkrid's command, and his reply was that this would be his final gift. His lover gazed at him intently. She didn't know why. She couldn't fathom the reason or even guess, but she had a feeling that Jackson wouldn't return.
Do you remember your father's words?
Suddenly, the words of Jackson's mentor and late father came to mind.
Find the place where you truly belong.
It had been both an order and a final wish. Jackson hadn't taken those words to heart, but his lover had never forgotten them. Still, it wasn't something she could fully understand at the moment. While Jackson was out on his night walk, Dunbachel, uncharacteristically unable to sleep, stepped outside. She sat on the stone chair where Rem had been sitting earlier and blankly stared up at the sky. It was a bright, moonlit night. It seemed like a perfect night for a night raid, but the enemy remained quiet. Dunbachel shivered. It wasn't because of the cold. Her life had been filled with struggle and survival. She fought to stay alive. More accurately, she did whatever it took, whether fleeing or fighting, to survive. Her instincts told her that danger was looming, like standing at the edge of a cliff, her body leaning precariously forward. And yet she didn't want to run, so what should she do?
Fight desperately.
Hadn't she already seen and learned this from watching Enkrid? Just like he did. The moonlight shifted as clouds obscured the sky. Darkness fell over the camp. Crackle, crackle. The flames of the surrounding torches flickered. Whoosh! A gust of wind swept over her body.
Fight desperately and push forward.
Dunbachel made up her mind, steeling her resolve. Even so, trembling didn't subside easily. Esther, still in her panther form, lay nestled in Enkrid's arms. She opened her eyes during the hours when everyone else was asleep. A disturbance in magic. In other words, she sensed the flow of some kind of spell. It was a form she had never seen before, something she couldn't quite describe at the moment. She looked up and saw Enkrid sleeping soundly above her, his quiet breathing. He was fast asleep without a care in the world.